In a corner of the galaxy, far from the bustling stars and thriving civilizations, there was a small planet named Kelvix 4. Once a beautiful world, it was now a desolate wasteland. The planet had been home to the Enkeri, an alien race with pale, silver skin and large, expressive eyes. They had been a proud and peaceful people, known for their advanced technology and wisdom. But that was before the war. Years ago, a war tore apart the Enkeri's home. Their enemies were powerful and relentless, and after the destruction of their capital city, the rest of the galaxy had turned its back on them. The Galactic Council, a powerful alliance of different spacefaring species, had decided that the Enkeri were no longer worth saving. They had been abandoned, left to survive on their own in a universe that no longer cared. The Enkeri's once great cities had crumbled. Their technology, which had once been unmatched, was now lost. Their people were scattered, struggling to survive in the ruins of their own civilization. Those who remained were weak, hungry, and desperate, constantly hunted by pirates and slavers. No one came to their aid. No one except for the humans. A small, daring human ship, the Vanguard, was cruising through the outer rim of space when it picked up a faint distress signal from Kelvix 4. The signal was weak, barely a whisper, but to the ship's captain, it was enough to act on. Captain Elias Grant was a seasoned leader, not one to shy away from danger. He had seen many strange worlds and met countless alien species, but something about this distress call intrigued him. There was something desperate in it, something that made him feel a pull to help. It wasn't like the typical missions he had undertaken for pay, and it wasn't for any political reason. It was just that gut feeling, the kind that humans seemed to get when they knew someone needed help. "Captain, this is strange," said Lieutenant Kira, Elias's second-in-command, as she analyzed the signal. "It's coming from Kelvix 4. That's a dead planet. The Enkeri were abandoned by the Council years ago. Why would they still be there?" Elias studied the screen for a moment, his mind racing. "Doesn't matter. Someone's in trouble, and we're going to help them." "Understood, Captain," Kira replied with a hint of disbelief in her voice. The crew of the Vanguard wasn't expecting to find much. After all, the Enkeri were abandoned, left to rot by the galaxy's more powerful civilizations. But when the ship landed on Kelvix 4, what they found was more than they could have imagined. The planet was quiet, eerily so. No bustling cities, no sign of the thriving civilization that had once called this place home. What remained were broken buildings, overgrown ruins, and the faintest traces of life. As Elias and his team ventured into the planet's ruined cities, they stumbled upon a small group of Enkeri survivors. They were weak, their bodies frail from hunger and the harsh conditions, but there was a spark in their eyes. The survivors were not only struggling with the planet's brutal environment, but also with the constant threat of slavers. The Turgan, a cruel race of space-faring slavers, had been scouring the galaxy for Enkeri survivors to capture. Their goal was simple: to sell the Enkeri as slaves to the highest bidder. Elias didn't need to be told. He knew what he had to do. The Turgan weren't going to get away with this. He addressed the Enkeri survivors, speaking to them with calm authority. "We won't leave you here. We got you now. We'll get you to safety." The Enkeri, though hesitant at first, saw something in Elias's eyes. They saw determination. They saw the human will to fight, something that had been lost in the galaxy's more peaceful species. They were used to being ignored, left to die. But the humans, these strange, powerful beings from Earth, were offering them hope. As Elias and his crew began to organize the survivors, they quickly realized the situation was more dire than they had first thought. The Turgan were not far behind, and if they didn't act fast, the Enkeri would be captured once again. But Elias wasn't about to let that happen. He gathered his crew around. "Get ready. We won't just take them to safety. We'll make sure the Turgan know they can't mess with the Enkeri anymore. We'll fight. We'll show them what humans are capable of." His crew nodded in agreement, ready to face whatever came next. Elias's eyes narrowed as he looked out over the horizon of the dying planet. The battle for the Enkeri had only just begun, and he was ready to fight for them. Because, unlike the rest of the galaxy, the humans had always believed in standing up for those who were abandoned. The moment Elias and his crew landed on Kelvix 4, they knew time was running out. The planet was a desolate place, but there was still a sense of danger in the air. The Enkeri survivors they had found were grateful, but they were also scared. They had been hunted for so long that even the presence of human rescuers didn't calm their nerves completely. "Captain, we've got company," Kira said, her voice steady as always, but the seriousness of the situation was clear in her tone. Elias turned to her quickly. "How far out?" "2 clicks west," Kira replied, her eyes scanning the horizon through the ship's viewports. "It's the Turgan. They've tracked us here. Looks like they've got a whole fleet coming." Elias clenched his fists, staring out into the wasteland. The Turgan had been ruthless in their pursuit of the Enkeri. They wouldn't hesitate to wipe out anyone standing in their way. "We don't have much time," Elias said, turning to his crew. "Prepare for a fight. We're not running. We're going to hold them off long enough to get these people to safety." The crew of the Vanguard moved quickly, gathering their gear and weapons. Elias didn't want to use violence if he didn't have to, but he wasn't about to let the Enkeri fall into the hands of slavers again. As the crew moved into position, Kira looked at Elias. "You know they're heavily armed, right? The Turgan aren't going to go easy on us." "I know," Elias replied, his voice low but confident. "But we got something they don't have." "What's that?" Elias grinned. "Bus." They set up defenses around the Enkeri survivors, using the remnants of ruined buildings as cover. The humans weren't soldiers in the typical sense, but they had fought in enough battles to know how to use the environment to their advantage. And they had weapons that the Turgan wouldn't expect, old-fashioned kinetic guns. The humans might not have the flashy energy weapons the Turgan used, but they had something even better: accuracy, precision, and determination. The first wave of Turgan soldiers arrived soon after. They were hulking creatures, dressed in dark armor and carrying massive plasma rifles. Elias didn't hesitate. He signaled to his crew, and within moments, they opened fire. The first Turgan soldier fell, a clean shot to the chest. But they didn't stop. More soldiers charged forward, their weapons blazing. "Hold your fire until they're within range," Elias shouted, his voice steady and commanding. The humans weren't rushing to fight. They were waiting for the right moment. As the Turgan neared, the humans opened up. The GLCK kinetic guns roared to life, sending rounds of metal tearing through the air. Each shot was carefully aimed, each one designed to stop an enemy before they could cause harm. The Turgan, used to overwhelming firepower, were taken by surprise. They had expected the humans to be weak, to be easy targets, but what they hadn't counted on was human resilience and precision. Kira took out another Turgan soldier, her shot hitting the enemy's weapon and sending it flying from his hands. She quickly followed up with a second shot, bringing him to the ground. Her aim was flawless, and the Turgan didn't even know what hit them. "Keep it tight," Elias ordered. "Focus on their leaders. We'll break their will to fight." The humans moved like a well-coordinated team, taking out the Turgan one by one. The slavers, disoriented by the unexpected resistance, started to retreat, but they didn't give up completely. More Turgan soldiers arrived, reinforcements flooding in from behind. "We need to buy more time," Elias shouted. He turned to the Enkeri survivors, who were watching the battle unfold. "Stay down and stay hidden. We'll get you out of here soon, I promise." One of the Enkeri, a young female named Tara, stepped forward. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she seemed determined. "We can help. We've been hiding for years. We know these ruins better than anyone." Elias hesitated for a moment, considering the offer. He knew they needed all the help they could get, but he also didn't want to put the Enkeri in more danger. "Stay behind cover," Elias said finally. "If you can, help us find their weak points. But don't risk yourselves." Tara nodded, and the N-carry began to move into position, using the ruins as their own weapons. The humans and N-carry worked together, creating distractions and laying traps for the Turgan soldiers. The teamwork was seamless, as though the humans and the N-carry had been allies for years. The Turgan were starting to realize they had underestimated their opponents. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were fighting smart. And for the first time in a long while, the Turgan began to question their ability to win this battle. Elias could see it in their eyes. The humans had taken control of the situation, and the Turgan were starting to panic. But this wasn't over yet. The battle had just begun, and the vanguard crew wasn't going to stop until the N-carry were safe. The Turgan were relentless. No matter how many they lost, they kept coming. But the humans and N-carry were holding their ground, refusing to back down. The vanguard's crew had set up a strong defense, using every bit of the ruined city to their advantage. But Elias knew this couldn't last forever. The Turgan had more soldiers, more weapons, and they were better organized. "We need a plan," Elias muttered to himself, scanning the battlefield. His crew was firing, ducking for cover, and doing their best to keep the Turgan at bay. But the slavers were starting to push forward. "Captain," Kara called out, "they've got reinforcements coming. If we don't act fast, we'll be surrounded." Elias's mind raced. They had been prepared for a fight, but the scale of the Turgan's forces was overwhelming. He turned to Kiera and the rest of the crew. "We need to make a move. There's a transport station to the east. If we can get there, we can use it to escape." "But the Turgan are too close," Kiera pointed out. "If we try to run now, they'll catch us before we even get halfway." Elias nodded. He knew the risk, but their only other option was to keep fighting and hope for a miracle. He didn't believe in miracles. He believed in people, in their ability to stand up for what was right. "We're not running," he said firmly. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." He turned to the N-carry survivors. Tara, the young N-carry female who had helped them earlier, was standing beside him. "You've been fighting here longer than we have. Any ideas?" Tara hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "There's an old weapons depot to the north. It's mostly abandoned, but it still has some powerful weapons inside. We might be able to use them against the Turgan." Elias's eyes lit up. That was the break they needed. "All right, here's the plan. We'll split up. Kira, you and I will head to the depot with a small team. We'll grab whatever we can use to turn the tide. The rest of you, hold your ground and keep the Turgan busy." It was a risky move, but it was their best shot. The humans and N-carry nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. There was no time to waste. As Elias and Kira led the way toward the weapons depot, the rest of the crew worked to create a diversion. They fired on the Turgan from hidden positions, trying to keep them distracted long enough for Elias and Kira to get to the depot. The journey was tense, the air thick with the sound of blaster fire and explosions. But Elias's mind was focused. He had to get those weapons. He couldn't let the N-carry and the humans fall to the Turgan. When they reached the depot, Elias kicked down the rusted door. Inside, they found rows of old weapons, rifles, energy grenades, and crates of explosive charges. Some of the equipment was damaged, but most of it was still usable. Kira wasted no time. She grabbed a heavy blaster rifle and handed it to Elias. "We've got enough here to make a real impact," Kira said, her voice low but determined. Elias nodded, feeling the surge of hope. They could do this. They could fight back. He looked over at the crates of explosives. "Let's set these up. We'll make sure the Turgan know we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting to win." Kira and Elias quickly set the charges around the depot, carefully planning their escape route. The explosions would be their signal to the rest of the crew, a signal that the Turgan weren't the only ones who could hit hard. As they finished setting the explosives, the ground suddenly shook. The Turgan had found their position. They weren't far behind. "We need to move now." Elias shouted. They ran back toward the main battlefield, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. When they reached the entrance of the depot, Elias gave a quick signal to the rest of the crew. With a sudden explosion, the depot erupted in a massive blast that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The Turken were caught off guard. The shockwave sent some of their soldiers flying, and others scrambled to regroup. Elias didn't wait. He led his crew forward, using the confusion to strike. The Turken, disoriented and shaken, struggled to regain control. The humans and Enkari were no longer just defending themselves. They were fighting back, with renewed strength and purpose. "Keep pushing," Elias yelled. "We're not stopping until they're gone." The battle was fierce, but the Turken were faltering. Their lines were broken. The human and Enkari forces, united in a common cause, pressed on, pushing the slavers back further and further. Tara, who had been helping from the shadows, joined Elias on the front lines. She was a fighter, her fear replaced by determination. Together, the humans and Enkari were a force to be reckoned with. They weren't just defending their homes, they were showing the galaxy that they would not be ignored. As the last of the Turken soldiers fled, Elias looked around. The battlefield was quiet now, save for the crackling fires and the sound of heavy breathing. The Enkari were safe for now, and the humans had made sure that the Turken would never threaten them again. "We did it," Kira said, looking at Elias with a mix of relief and pride. Elias looked at her, a tired but satisfied smile crossing his face. "Not yet, but we've made a start." And with that, the battle for Kelvix 4 was over. But Elias knew this was only the beginning. The Enkari had been saved for now, but there was much more to do. The galaxy had long forgotten them, but the humans would not. The battle had been won, but the cost was heavy. The remnants of the Turken forces were retreating, but the humans and Enkari knew this victory was only temporary. The Turken would regroup, and when they returned, they would come back even stronger. But for now, there was a brief moment of peace, a chance to breathe, to heal, and to prepare for what was to come. Elias stood by the edge of the battlefield, watching the survivors work. The humans and Enkari were gathering their wounded, tending to the injured, and beginning to clear the debris left by the intense fight. The sound of distant explosions still echoed in the air, reminders that the war was far from over. But Elias was determined to make sure the Turken would never hurt these people again. "We can't let them regroup," Kira said, approaching him. She was covered in dirt and sweat, but her eyes were sharp and focused. Elias nodded. "We won't. The next move is ours." They had bought the Enkari some time, but time was running out. The Turken would be back, and they needed a plan to ensure the Enkari's safety in the long run. It was a fight that would take more than just weapons. It would require every ounce of strategy and willpower they had left. Tara, the Enkari survivor who had become one of Elias's most trusted allies, approached them. "We need a place to hide. The Turken will destroy our cities if we don't disappear for a while." Elias looked at her. "We'll make sure they can't find you. We'll help you relocate." Kara frowned. "But where do we go? We can't keep running forever." "There is a planet," Tara said slowly, "far from here. It's a place where no one would think to look for us. We've always avoided it because it's too isolated, too dangerous. But it might be the only place we can truly be safe." Elias thought for a moment. The idea of hiding in a place no one else wanted to go didn't sound ideal, but it might be their best shot. "Tell us about it." Tara described the planet, Zara 7. It was a harsh, barren world, known only for its deadly wildlife and treacherous terrain. It was a place where few had dared to venture, and those who had returned had brought back tales of the many dangers that awaited anyone foolish enough to settle there. But for the Enkari, it was perfect. The Turken wouldn't be able to find them, and the human forces had the skills to survive in the harsh environment. It was a chance for the Enkari to rebuild without the constant threat of annihilation. After listening to Tara's description, Elias made up his mind. It's risky, but it's the only chance you've got. We'll help you move there, but we need to act quickly before the Turken regroup. The humans began preparing for the journey. It would take them a few days to get everything ready, but Elias knew they couldn't waste any time. The more the Turgen knew about the Enkari's location, the more difficult it would be to keep them hidden. As the days passed, Elias's crew worked hard to transport the Enkari to the secret location. They loaded their ships with supplies and weapons, and made sure everyone was prepared for the harsh conditions they would face on Sara 7. When the time finally came to leave, Elias stood with Kiera and Tara by the ships. The sky above was still clouded with smoke from the recent battle, but the stars were visible now, stretching across the darkened sky. It felt like a new beginning. You know, Kiera said with a small smile, this is the first time I've seen you actually hope for something. Elias gave her a tired grin. I'm hoping for a future where the Turgen can't just take what they want. A future where the Enkari can live without fear. Tara nodded, standing by their side. And for the first time, I believe it's possible. They boarded the ships and lifted off from the surface of Kelvix 4. The journey was long, but Elias could feel the weight of the moment. They were leaving behind the battlefield, the bloodshed, and the Turken's threats. They were heading to a new world, a world where the Enkari could rebuild, free from the oppression of the Turgen. It was a fresh start. As the ships traveled through space, the crew remained alert, knowing that they still had to be careful. They didn't know when the Turgen would regroup, but they couldn't risk being caught. The journey to Sara 7 would be their chance to disappear and start again. But Elias also knew one thing for sure. The Turken had no idea what they were about to face. The humans had no intention of simply letting them win. Elias and his crew would fight for the Enkari until the end, no matter how long it took. We'll protect them, Elias whispered to himself. They'll never be alone again. The journey to Sara 7 was long and challenging, but Elias and his crew pushed through. The harsh conditions of space travel, coupled with the uncertainty of their destination, made everyone uneasy. However, the thought of the Turken finding the Enkari kept them focused. The survival of an entire race depended on their success. As their ships entered the outer orbit of Sara 7, the crew looked out through the viewports. The planet was a desolate wasteland, a far cry from the lush and peaceful worlds most civilizations inhabited. The surface was cracked and uneven, with stretches of barren land interrupted only by dangerous, rocky mountains and deep ravines. There was little life, except for the vicious creatures that made the planet their home. Tara stood beside Elias, watching the planet grow larger in their view. This is it, she said, her voice quiet but filled with a strange sense of resolve. This is where we'll rebuild. We'll make it work, Elias replied. We always do. As they descended through the atmosphere, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air felt thin. They landed in a relatively safe zone, a flat area surrounded by jagged rocks that provided some natural shelter. The crew worked quickly to set up a temporary camp. The Enkari, though weary from their long journey, were eager to begin the process of securing the area. They knew how important it was to make the planet their home, even in its harsh conditions. We have to establish a base camp first, Kira said, looking over the land. Find water, food sources, and shelter. We can't afford to make mistakes. Elias nodded. Tara, what's the best route for scouting this area? Tara studied the terrain for a moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. We need to head south, toward the canyons. There's a source of fresh water there. It'll be difficult to get to, but we'll need it to survive. Kira frowned. And what about those creatures you mentioned earlier? They stay mostly in the mountains, Tara replied. But we can't take any chances. Stay close together. Stay alert. We'll make it. The humans and Enkari worked side by side to prepare for the journey. They gathered their gear and set out at first light, moving cautiously across the rugged landscape. The journey was harder than they anticipated. The air was thin and made it harder to breathe, and the temperature fluctuated wildly, swinging from freezing cold to unbearable heat. The land seemed to stretch on forever, and there was no sign of life except for the distant roar of creatures echoing through the mountains. After several hours, they reached the canyon's edge. Below them, a winding river cut through the land, its water sparkling in the faint sunlight. But there was no time to rest. They had to find a way to make this place their home. Fast. The team set up camp by the river, and Elias and Kira began strategizing. We can use the river for drinking water, but we'll need to fortify the area. We'll need shelters, defense systems, and food supplies. Tara pointed to the canyon walls. We can use the rock for shelter. There are natural caves further up. We can build a safe haven there. Elias considered the idea. Good. We'll use the caves for shelter. The rest of the team will gather food and set up defenses. For the next few days, the crew worked tirelessly. The Encarry's advanced technology was useful in some ways, but the planet's rough terrain made everything more difficult. The humans, however, had adapted to difficult conditions before, and it showed. They used their resourcefulness to turn the harsh environment to their advantage. They fashioned shelters out of the rock and built small traps to catch any creatures that ventured too close. They set up a perimeter of alarms and signals, ensuring no one would be caught off guard. In the evenings, as the sun set and the temperature dropped, Elias stood outside his shelter, looking at the stars above. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, how they had fought to protect the Encarry, how they had fought to keep hope alive. Now, on this cold, unforgiving planet, it felt like they were starting over. They had been through so much, but they were still standing. They had made it this far, and they would make it even further. Kira joined him, her face lit by the glow of a small fire. "It's quiet," she said softly. "For now," Elias replied. "But we got a long way to go." Tara walked over to them, her eyes filled with determination. "We will survive here. We will make this our home. The Turgan won't find us. Not here. Not ever again." Elias smiled, looking at the team around him. "We'll fight for them, just like we've always done. We'll protect them." And so they did. Day by day, they adapted. The land may have been harsh, but they were tougher. They would survive, not just because they had to, but because they believed in each other. They believed in the future they were building. And as the days passed, the Encarry began to believe too. Weeks had passed since the humans and Encarry had arrived on Xara 7. The harsh planet, with its rocky terrain and unpredictable climate, had proven to be a difficult home. But it was theirs. Slowly, but surely, they had made the best of their new surroundings. The shelters were set up, and the group had found a steady supply of fresh water from the river Hera had shown them. They had begun planting the first crops that would one day help them survive long-term. But as they worked, they knew they couldn't afford to get too comfortable. The Turgan were still out there, and they could return at any time. Elias stood on the cliff edge overlooking their camp, his gaze scanning the horizon. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting an orange glow over the rugged landscape. There was a strange calm in the air, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The winds had died down, and the usual sounds of the creatures that roamed the planet were quieter than usual. "What's on your mind?" Kira's voice broke through his thoughts. She had joined him at the cliff, her eyes also searching the distance. "I'm wondering if we've really made it," Elias said softly. "It feels like we're waiting for something to happen." Kira nodded, understanding. The Turgan won't stop. But this place, it's different. They won't find us easily. Not unless we let our guard down. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching as the sun rose higher in the sky. The camp below seemed peaceful, but Elias knew better than to let his guard down. The peaceful times they were experiencing might not last. They had made it this far, but the Turgan could strike at any moment. "We've been lucky so far," Kira said, breaking the silence. But luck doesn't last forever. We need to stay vigilant. Elias turned to her, a determined look in his eyes. We will. We have to. Back at the camp, the humans and Enkari worked together to fortify their position. The shelters were reinforced with rock, and a defense perimeter was established, with sentry points set up around the area. Everyone was aware of the danger, and everyone was prepared to fight if necessary. Tara approached Elias and Kira as they walked through the camp. We found a new source of food, she said. A cave system further east that's rich with edible plants and fungi. It will help us survive longer without relying on the crops. Good. We need all the help we can get, Elias replied. But we have to make sure we're not drawing attention to ourselves. Tara agreed. We'll keep it quiet, but we can't ignore the fact that the Turgan might find us eventually. It's just a matter of time. Elias glanced at Kira, who nodded in agreement. We have to be ready when that time comes. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He lay on his bedroll, staring at the ceiling of his shelter. The sounds of the camp outside had quieted, and the only noise was the wind blowing through the rocks. It should have been peaceful, but his mind was racing. He thought of the Turgan and what they had done to the Enkari, their entire race nearly wiped out, their cities destroyed. The Turgan were ruthless, and Elias knew they wouldn't stop until they had finished what they started. He turned over, trying to find some rest, but the nagging worry wouldn't leave. What if they couldn't defend this place? What if the Turgan found them? Suddenly, the loud screech of an alarm rang out across the camp. Elias shot up, his heart racing. Kara burst into his shelter, her face serious. It's the Turgan. They found us. The camp erupted into action. Humans and Enkari grabbed their weapons, ready to defend their home. Elias quickly joined Kiera and Tara as they rushed to the command center. The view screen displayed several ships approaching fast, descending from the sky. There was no mistaking it. These were Turgan ships. We don't have much time, Tara said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. They're coming in fast. Elias looked at the team around him. There was no room for fear. We fought for this. We're not giving it up. He turned to Kira. You and I will take the front. Tara, stay back and coordinate the defenses. Make sure the Enkari are ready. The team nodded, each member setting to work. There was no hesitation. They had come a long way, and they weren't about to let the Turgan take it all from them. The Turgan ships came closer, their engines roaring through the atmosphere. The ground trembled as they landed, their dark forms casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Elias gripped his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. He turned to Kira, who gave him a determined nod. We're ready, she said. The first wave of Turgan soldiers stepped off their ships, armed and ready for battle. The humans and Enkari, however, were not intimidated. They had fought harder battles, and they knew what they had to protect. The storm had arrived, and it was time to face it head-on. The sound of the Turgan ships landing echoed across the rocky landscape, shaking the earth beneath the feet of Elias and his team. As the dark shadows of the enemy forces moved across the planet's surface, the humans and Enkari took their positions, ready for what was sure to be the fight of their lives. Elias stood with Kiera by his side, the weight of the situation settling in. There was no turning back now. The Turgan had found them, and they would not go down without a fight. The makeshift defenses they had built were sturdy, but Elias knew that the Turgan's technology was far superior. Still, he had faith. He had faith in his team. He had faith in the human spirit. We're not giving up this place, Kira said, her voice steady, though her grip on her weapon tightened. We fought too hard to survive. This is ours. Elias nodded, his eyes focused on the advancing enemy. We protect it, no matter what. The Turgan soldiers advanced in perfect formation, their dark armor gleaming in the fading light. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of weakness. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to wipe out anyone who stood in their way. Terra's voice came through the comms, calm but urgent. All positions are locked down, and carry defenses are ready. We're as prepared as we can be. Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself. It was time. Everyone, stay sharp, he said, his voice carrying over the comms to every person in the camp. No matter what happens, we fight together. The first shots rang out, the sound of energy weapons filling the air. The humans and Enkari fired back, their blasters lighting up the dimming sky. The Turgan soldiers, shielded by their advanced armor, advanced steadily, firing in return. The battle was fierce, and the stakes could not have been higher. But despite the odds, Elias could see the resilience of the team. The humans fought with the same determination they had shown in every challenge they had faced, and the Enkari, though outnumbered, fought with a fire that Elias had not seen before. This was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting everything they had built together. Kira fired her weapon with deadly precision, taking down one Turgan soldier after another. Elias moved alongside her, covering their flank, every movement calculated and efficient. Together, they made an unstoppable team. The Turgan were relentless, but Elias and his people were unyielding. They fought with a desperation that the Turgan couldn't understand. This was their home. This was their future, and they would not let it be taken from them. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. The Turgan had been pushed back several times, but they kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Elias could see the weariness in his team's eyes, but there was something else too. There was a spark, a refusal to give up. As the battle continued, Elias noticed something. The Turgan soldiers, despite their advanced technology, were starting to falter. They had underestimated the humans and the Enkari. The enemy's formations were less coordinated now, their attacks more disjointed. Elias could see it in their eyes. They were losing confidence. "Now's our chance," Elias shouted over the comms. "Push forward." With a renewed surge of energy, the humans and Enkari advanced, their weapons blazing. The Turgan, once so confident, began to retreat, their disciplined formations breaking apart under the relentless assault. The humans had fought with everything they had, and it was beginning to show. The Turgan forces scrambled to get back to their ships, but it was too late. The humans and Enkari had already seized the advantage. The enemy was in full retreat, their ships lifting off the ground in a desperate bid to escape. "We did it," Kira breathed, her voice full of disbelief. "We actually did it." Elias looked around at the battlefield. The ground was littered with debris, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and burnt metal. But there was no mistaking the victory that was theirs. The Turgan had been forced to retreat, and their invasion had been stopped. The camp, though battered and weary, was safe. The people, human and Enkari alike, had proven something that day. They had proven that no matter the odds, no matter the enemy, they would stand together and fight. And they would never back down. Elias turned to his team, his heart swelling with pride. "We've protected this place. We've protected each other. And we'll keep fighting to keep it safe." As the Turgan ships disappeared into the sky, Elias stood tall, knowing that this was only the beginning. They had won this battle, but the war for survival was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Elias felt something he hadn't felt since their arrival on Xara 7. Hope.